Hey there, I thought I'd reply to your comment. I have spent just a little bit of background on me. Spent the last 3.5 years as a nuclear officer on board a submarine. Did about a year and a half of training at a facility that had three different types of reactors, or three different reactors, as well as some schoolwork, and then a background in mechanical engineering. So I know a few things a little bit. I've been operational and theory side of the house, but that doesn't mean I know everything. But I just wanted to give you some grounds for what I'm saying. So the big thing about TRISO fuel and molten salt reactors and high temperature gas reactors is number one, stored energy. So you can imagine for a second, all of the reactors we've run, power reactors that, for the most part, were pressurized water or boiling water reactors. What that means is we had to get water and pressurize it to high pressures and then run it through a reactor. The reason we have to pressurize it is because at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, it wants to boil. So, like for example, Chernobyl or SL1, what happened was a prompt critical event which caused all the water to vaporize, which overwhelmed the pressure containment capability of the vessel and blew it up like a giant pressure cooker. The problem with that is that those particular pressure cookers had radioactive material in them. So the radioactive material spread out everywhere and contaminated the area. So how is TRISO fuel, high temperature gas reactors, and molten salt reactors different? Let's start with molten salt reactors. Molten salt, instead of boiling at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, it boils at like 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. So it wants to stay as a liquid at a much higher temperature. That's really great because now we don't have to pressurize our systems. So let's say a prompt critical event happens, that boiling point won't be reached nearly as quickly. It will give it time for a thing called negative coefficient of reactivity to happen and let the reactor calm back down. When I say how quickly this has to happen, we're talking 1 to the minus 13 seconds. So literally like a trillionth of a second. So very quickly are these interactions happening. So molten salt has a much higher boiling temperature, so it doesn't have to be kept under pressure. So there's that benefit. High temperature gas reactors doesn't want to turn to a vapor. The next phase it can go to is plasma, and that is really, really high temperatures, and the density doesn't change all that much if it hits that next phase, where water, liquid, wants to go to a vapor, and when that vapor expands, we're talking around, I think it's a 4,000% volume increase, so it wants to expand really quickly, hence an explosion. So high temperature gas reactors don't have that either. So TRISO fuel. TRISO fuel, basically what you do is you run that, technically you could run it in a water reactor, but there's not a lot of benefit to that for those reasons I described. You still have that stored energy aspect. But the TRISO fuel, what it does is we operate on 3 layers of containment on all American and I think all modern Russian reactors as well. All reactors around the world now have these 3 layers. The first layer starts with the cladding. So, for example, in commercial reactors, they have these tiny pins that are like the size of the end of my pinky, and the uranium oxide sits inside that little thimble-looking thing, that little cylinder, and on the outside of that is a material called zircaloy, and that zircaloy, we found out, interacts with steam and produces hydrogen. Hence what I was mentioning in Fukushima. The water reacted, or the zircaloy reacted with the steam, producing hydrogen, which they vented to the compartment up on top of the reactor. There was a spark in there, and the hydrogen exploded. Basically a little Hindenburg. Problem is that air was contaminated because what happened was the fuel got so hot that zircaloy melted off and exposed the radioactive material, the spent fuel material. Remember how I was saying how you could technically hold raw uranium in your hand? That's because it's very stable. 238 and 235 have a half-life on the order of magnitude of 300,000 years. So it decays very slowly. While it decays for a long time, it decays very slowly. Okay, so I'm dragging on a little bit. How does TRISO fuel change? So TRISO fuel is in a golf ball form instead of the small cylinders. What that does is they've designed into it, one, it has enough surface area that it can dissipate the heat of the fuel in a non-coolant casualty or a non-coolant situation. So with the TRISO fuel just came right out of a reactor, it wouldn't then just melt itself and then turn into a glob, which would then consolidate into the bottom of the core and then melt and keep going further and further, hence China syndrome. It won't do that because it has enough surface area to dissipate the heat. If you're a computer guy at all, this is why you run a cooler on your CPU, because you're trying to increase the surface area that you're exchanging heat to. Same idea with the TRISO fuel. You've got a little thing that's trying to generate a ton of heat, so you put it over a ton of surface area, get that heat out, the decay heat specifically. There's also some other really interesting factors as well as like refueling in our current boiling water reactors and pressurized water reactors. Remember how I said you have to keep it at a high pressure to keep it as liquid? So in order to refuel it, you have to cool all the way down, shut it down, open the lid, swap the fuel in and out, usually from the top, swapping your pins in and out, and then you close it back up, pressurize it back up, heat it back up, and we're off to making energy again. With the TRISO fuel, because you can keep it at ambient pressure, because it's just high temperature gas, you're not trying to keep it in a phase, you can just swap these golf balls out from the bottom. So they're like a tall reactor that funnels down, and it's just like when they lottery number, except not a tumbling system. Basically, they pull a golf ball out, take it over to a hot cell, cut the fuel open, dissolve it, pull the different fission products out, and then put it into the next golf ball, run it again. This is called reprocessing. Russia, France, China, India, and I'm sure I'm going to forget someone else, does reprocessing already. The U.S. doesn't, because we view certain treaties in a way that we say that it's a non-proliferation act. But in reality, we're the only country that really looks at it that way. Additionally, it's still cheap enough to pull uranium-235 out of the ground that there's not a lot of financial benefit to reprocessing yet. Now, when uranium-235 starts running out, which it will because it's not as abundant as uranium-238, we'll start reprocessing that fuel to extract the useful parts and then put it into the new fuel. So I'd say in the next 10 years, you're going to see a lot more reprocessing. Other countries are running out of uranium-235, so they're already pushing the reprocessing thing. So the spent fuel storage, a lot of the issues that come up on why we shouldn't run nuclear reactors, they're going to fix themselves through capitalism because it'll become more profitable to reprocess that spent waste than it would be to go mine new uranium. So it'll take care of itself, which is why you don't see a lot of nuclear scientists really pushing this hard, just because they understand it's not a driving engineering issue, it's a financial issue. Hope that answered your question. Please ask me any more. I love this stuff. Yeah, happy to help you however I can.